Welcome back to Pause It For Me. Where do I even begin? Hannah, why don't you tell the listeners what we watched this week?
We watched Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, the new film, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
Yes, we have two firsts for this podcast. The first of the firsts is that we actually watched a movie that we'd both already seen, which was Who Framed Roger Rabbit.
That's true.
And I think we watched it together. So we kind of treaded old ground, but it's been a while since we watched it. I had only seen it once. Had you seen it before that?
No. The last time we saw it, maybe a year or two ago, was the first time I had seen it.
Right. And the second of the two firsts, that's a funny sentence, is that we're actually going to talk about both movies at the same time this time, because they have so much to do with each other's, so much shared DNA, and so much to compare and contrast that I think it only makes sense to dive into both of them at the same time and just bounce back and forth. What do you think?
I agree.
Yeah. So that said, let's set it up for our audience here. We'll talk about them sort of starting in the order that we watched them, because we watched Rescue Rangers first last night. You'd been craving watching it for a few days. You just wanted something kind of light and fun-loving.
Yeah.
So we watched it yesterday, and then this morning, I woke you up and brought you out into the living room with Who Framed Roger Rabbit just queued up. I wasn't even like, hey, do you want to watch this or should we watch this? You just walked out and I hit play and you sat down without saying anything and you just acquiesced to the watching experience.
I mean, it made enough sense to me because it was on my mind as we were watching Chip and Dale last night.
Yeah.
So
the only other thing I would have maybe put on was Cool World with Brad Pitt.
No, it's bad.
I know it's bad, but that's anyway.
Yeah.
So we'll start off the conversation with Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers, which came out this year. The logline is as follows. 30 years after their popular television show ended, Chipmunks Chip, played by John Mulaney, and Dale, played by, the name escapes me, Andy Samberg. Yes, Andy Samberg, live very different lives. When a cast member from the original series mysteriously disappears, the pair must reunite to save their friends. So that's from 2022, directed by Akiva
something
from The Lonely Island.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you didn't know who that was?
No.
Oh.
Like, I obviously know The Lonely Island, but I didn't realize one of them directed it, which makes total sense why Andy Samberg is one of the leads.
Yeah, I think he also directed Popstar.
That makes sense.
Yeah, because Lonely Island is Andy, Akiva, and Yorma.
Right, okay.
Yorma Taccone.
That's right.
Right. And then the other movie that we watched, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, from 1988, directed by Robert Zemeckis, who I'm a fan of, Back to the Future, Castaway.
The list goes on.
Polar Express, oddly enough, because there's a Polar Express joke in Chip and Dale.
Rightfully so.
Rightfully so, yeah. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? A tune-hating detective, played by Bob Hoskins, is a cartoon rabbit's only hope to prove his innocence when he is accused of murder. Classic.
Classic.
It's a classic.
Well, it's a classic now because it's been a long time. I feel like at the time it was kind of a mixed reaction to it, right?
Where are you getting this from?
Well, I just feel like some people could maybe be turned off by, like, an adult cartoon thing at the time. Of course, that's normal now.
I don't know anything about what the reaction was at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I know it was a very expensive movie at the time.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
It costs somewhere, it's kind of an estimated budget. I got differing figures depending on where I looked. Somewhere between 50 million and 70 million.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As a coincidence, Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers also cost 70 million, but that's 70 million in 2022 money.
That's true with inflation and stuff.
Get different get different mileage out of that 50 to 70 million.
Yeah. Of course, like, animation, it was so much more impressive in the 80s because there wasn't anything like it at that point. Whereas now it's like animation is, it's definitely hard, I'm sure, but it's the techniques that have been developed are easier.
Right. Well, in true Pause It For Me fashion, we haven't talked about the movies since we watched them. Chip and Dale, we didn't say anything about. Roger Rabbit we had seen before, and we kind of made a couple comments here and there. After Roger Rabbit, I threw on, to refresh ourselves, a video by Captain Christian, which talks about the animation in Who Framed Roger Rabbit. which we'll get into a little later. But since you were, I would say, the most excited to watch Chip and Dale because we watched it first, I have a lot to say. I don't know if it could glean that, but since you were most excited, why don't you hit me with your thoughts first?
Well, I'm assuming you didn't like the movie, but I mean, I could totally be wrong.
Where are you getting this assumption from?
You were just pretty silent throughout, and I feel like maybe you weren't trying to say anything negative because you didn't like want me to have a bad time, but you weren't into it. That's just, I could be wrong. I wanted to watch this not because I thought it would be maybe objectively good. I just thought it would be a fun time. Like one of those kind of like sick day movies you throw on, like, this is gonna make me feel good, and maybe it's a little bit cheesy, a little bit bad, but it's still kind of a nice, good ride that you don't have to overthink.
Okay. I will say, I mean, since we've been watching movies for this podcast, I've been trying to say less during movies so that I don't kind of spoil what I thought or things that I might want to say on the podcast. So that's why I was pretty silent during the experience. That's
fair. I snickered a couple times, and I would point out like dumb things in the frame. I'd be like, bird. Just to make myself laugh. Stuff like that.
So what did you think?
I enjoyed it. I think some of the writing was good. And I think occasionally I rolled my eyes or I wish that it was better. And one thing that I gleamed from this new Chip and Dale was there was definitely adult references that the kids would not understand, but it was more quote-unquote family friendly. Whereas Who Framed Roger Rabbit was definitely less family friendly, even though it had a PG rating at the time.
Right.
I think it was one of the things that created PG-13.
That's possible. Because it was about like straight up murder. Whereas Chip and Dale was like, oh, they're getting plastic surgery and making bootleg movies.
Well, and it was about cheese, which was obviously a drug for Monterey Jack, but it was a little more coded language. Yeah. Whereas Jessica Rabbit is like va va voom, and like they're drinking lots of alcohol, and it's a little more adult.
Yeah.
And, I think they maybe swear a little bit. Whereas Chip and Dale was, I think they were trying to make it like enjoyable for adults, but if a kid was in the room, it wouldn't be like a huge deal. That's what I was gathering from it.
Fair enough, yeah. I thought it was junk.
Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't like it.
Yeah, I didn't think you would. Well, you don't like Andy Samberg, really. Which is
That's
weird.
Not true.
You like The Lonely Island, but you don't like him on his own or something?
I have nothing against Andy Samberg, just like I have nothing against Adam Sandler. I have simply never seen Andy Samberg really in anything that I liked him in. I don't dislike Andy Samberg as a person or as an actor or as a musician. It's just like any like trailer for anything that I've seen or any full movie that I've seen, like Hot Rod. Hot Rod's one of the worst movies I've ever seen. And anybody who's listening to this who just gasped when I said that, I challenge you to fight me on this and come on this podcast and defend Hot Rod because I freaking hate it.
Some people like it. It's just different.
Well, some people like bad movies.
Yeah. Whether you can say it's objectively or subjectively, like I didn't love everything about it, but I had a good time watching it.
Hot Rod?
Well, both. I didn't dislike Hot Rod. There was maybe some moments where I rolled my eyes. Like,
Junk.
One of my least favorite things is people repeating jokes in an order to make it more funny or something.
Yeah.
And Will Arnett says, like, his girlfriend's name over and over and over and over and over again. And it's like, it's a little bit funny and then gets so not funny. And then maybe it's, like, a little funny again, but it, like, really treads that line and it's pretty obnoxious.
Are we still talking about Chip and Dale or Hot Rod?
Well, shared DNA. You got The Lonely Island. You got Will Arnett as like a villainous character in that, and then he's also the villainous character in Peter Pan. As Peter Pan.
Wait, Will Arnett was in Hot Rod?
Yeah.
I don't remember this at all.
Yeah.
But which movie were you talking about when you said he says his girlfriend's name? Hot Rod?
Hot Rod.
When's the last time you saw this movie?
College.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. I think I saw it in high school. You have a much better memory than me for weird
Random
stuff like that, yeah.
I mean, I guess it sticks out more to me.
So Chippendale.
Chippendale.
Junk.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of why I started out with where do I begin. There was a lot that I didn't like about this.
That's fine. I didn't think it was a perfect movie. I enjoyed it for what it was, and I snickered a couple times. I don't know if I would recommend it to adults. I would maybe recommend it to children.
Yeah. I mean, so I don't often fall asleep during movies. Very rare. But I was fading during Chippendale.
Okay, to be fair, we were watching it at like 11 at night.
We constantly watch movies at 11 at night.
Well, we've been getting up early lately.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
But just like, okay, I think I'll start with Chippendale. Okay?
Yeah.
I'll try and prove a point here. Andy Samberg and John Mulaney.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. I'm going to hit you with this. Do an impression of Roger Rabbit from Roger Rabbit. And go.
I really needed that.
Uh-huh.
I don't know.
Okay, now do an impression.
Put on the spot.
Do an impression of Dale from Chippendale, played by Andy Samberg.
It's just his voice.
It's just his voice. So, first things first, they're offering absolutely nothing here. Those roles could have been played by anyone.
Right, because on the show they had like high-pitched voices, which they said like we're actors, and they like put on the voice.
Right. But I'm not saying like, hey, I need the high-pitched voice. I'm just saying you can tell that Andy Samberg and John Mulaney are not voice actors. Because what they did was they came into the recording booth and they stepped in front of the mic and they read the lines that were on the script in front of them. And it was like, hey, it's me, I'm Andy Samberg, I'm playing Dale in Chippendale, and here we go. Yeah, Rescue Rangers. Like, absolutely nothing. They're bringing nothing to the character, nothing to the table.
I don't disagree, but that's sometimes what made it funny, is they're clearly just riffing to me. Like, I chuckled when John Mulaney was like, I got a message on my landline. That can't be good. So dumb.
I mean, that's the extent of the comedy.
Yeah.
And like, the thing that I hate about modern sort of like comedies like this is the stupid like observational humor of like, classic example of show don't tell, or in this case, tell don't show. Like there were many times in Who Framed Roger Rabbit where it was like a blink and you miss it joke, you know, like the musical chairs, right? There's a box that says musical chairs. You see that it says musical chairs for like half a second before it bursts open and then the chairs start playing instruments. And that's a joke that lasts a few seconds, but it doesn't need to be explained to you. Like, if you see it, you get it. Musical chairs, they're chairs that play music. But you know, it's not like Bob Hoskins is being like, oh, I hate those musical chairs, you know? Or like, you know, that would happen constantly in Chippendale, was like, there would be a kind of funny blink and you miss it joke. And then John Mulaney would be like, well, how about that thing over there? That's pretty crazy. And it's like, thank you for spelling it out for me. I'm a stupid doo-doo head kid watching this, and I need the jokes explained to me. Thank you very much, John Mulaney.
That's what makes me think that knowing Dan Gregor, I feel like they probably pitched this as an adult film, and Disney was like, the only way you can make it is you have to dumb it down for kids.
Oh, such a waste of time. Because I thought it was going to be cool. You know?
I thought it was going to be pretty cool.
But like, just this stupid modern style of comedy where it's like, we see the joke plays out, now let's explain the joke to make sure everybody in the audience gets it. Because we don't want to waste that joke.
Well, here's a good example of that I didn't like. Mm-hmm. Is when we first saw, like, Ugly Sonic in the background, I snickered because I'm like, that's kind of funny modern reference.
Yeah.
But then they made him, like, a character and they talk to him and stuff. I'm like, I don't really need that. I just kind of wish it was just like a throwaway joke in the background.
I totally agree. I felt the exact same way about that.
Mm-hmm.
Just this style. Like, I'm not into having everything like, you know, beat me over the head with it, right?
Yeah.
And again, going back to Show Don't Tell, the movie opens and Andy Samberg's like, Hey, my name's Dale. I'm a chipmunk. I used to be on the show called Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers. It was a real cool time, and we had Gadget and Monterey Jack and around for 3 years, and I was there with my best. It's like, dude, just show the show and we'll get it. Show it for like 5 seconds and then do like a cross dissolve into what the characters look like now. It's like, okay, we get it. We don't need like dialogue explaining the backstory and doing like tell, don't show. This is like movie making 101.
This is what makes me think it's oriented to kids because they wouldn't have seen the original show as it aired.
Kids are not as dumb as movie producers seem to think they are.
I know that, but movie producers tend to be like, the audience isn't going to get this. We have to really beat it over people's heads.
If you show an old-looking TV with fuzzy VHS lines and old-looking animation, and then you transition to CGI Dale, and you show, like, 2022 or whatever, they're going to get it.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's not that hard.
I don't disagree. But, you know, again, it's just... Sometimes there's studio interference, especially with something like Disney.
I mean, okay, so going back a little bit, you like Andy Samberg and you like John Mulaney. You've watched, like, as far as I know, all of John Mulaney's stand-up specials.
Yep. You
watch a lot of Andy Samberg stuff. I think you watch all of Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
I did. That doesn't mean I love everything that Andy Samberg does joke-wise.
But my question is, do you feel like they brought their trademark humor... You know, forgetting about, like, making Chip and Dale their own characters or whatever, you know, they cast John Mulaney and Andy Samberg. Do you think they brought the John Mulaney and Andy Samberg touch to these characters?
At times.
Like what times?
Dale is a little more like a wisecracking, lazy guy, and that's usually the type of characters that Andy Samberg plays.
Mm-hmm.
Like, on Brooklyn Nine-Nine, his character is known for being, like, super messy and, like, making lots of mistakes, being kind of a bit of a buffoon, but still capable.
So what I'm getting from this is that Andy Samberg's, like, typecast.
Well, probably.
That's no fun.
I would love to see him sort of do an Adam Sandler thing where he does like a really serious role. I think that could be really interesting.
Has he never done one?
Nothing comes to mind, really.
Was Palm Springs like so comedic?
Yeah.
Or whatever that movie's called?
It is better though because it is a little bit darker than he usually does.
Right.
But it is comedic.
Right.
Also has J.K. Simmons in it.
J.K. Simmons. We'll get to him.
Yeah.
So, and then John Mulaney.
John Mulaney is sort of more of like a... Even though he is a comedian, he has like a straight man vibe. You know what I mean? Like sort of 1940s, like I'm the type A type guy. And like that fits in with sort of the Chip side of things. So yeah, like in a way he's like the more of the guy that points out stuff or whatever. So in that way, yes, but it's more like watered down versions of themselves. I mean, It is cartoon though. So.
It's like, it really didn't seem like, you know, they had played, it seemed like they were cast because they had maybe played roles that were similar in the past, but that they really didn't bring much to these characters to make them any different from any of those previous roles.
Well, it was definitely more of a star vehicle thing. Like, Isn't it interesting that Andy Samberg is playing a chipmunk? Whereas someone that's super talented like Tress MacNeille is just doing her thing in the background. I
know. And speaking of that, you know, we'll add the sting. Andy's Trivia Corner. Here it is. Or whatever. What was it that you called it?
Yeah, I think
there you go. Yeah.
Andy's Trivia Corner.
I had a lot of trouble coming up with or finding trivia for this movie that was interesting enough to read on the podcast. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, on the other hand, had so much interesting trivia, I had a hard time choosing between things of what to read.
Well, the production was so much more fascinating, whereas...
For sure.
In 2022, an animated film is just not as hard to do.
Well, I have a lot to say about the animation too, but just on the topic of voice actors for a second, let me hit you with this. Although Jim Cummings did not reprise his role of Monterey Jack in this film, he did star in this film by reprising his role of Fat Cat from the TV series, along with the roles of Winnie the Pooh, Tigger, and Pete when shown in a bootleg parody, and also voiced Darkwing Duck, who made a brief cameo appearance at the ending of the movie.
But
so,
why not Monterey Jack?
Yeah, this to say, like, I hate when, you know, animated movies or movies that involve voice actors do this, where they'll take a character that has been played for years by a very talented voice actor, and they'll just, like, replace them with a star for, like, not even that many lines of dialogue. And it feels so unjustified. Like, I'm pretty sure Space Jam did this with a couple different characters.
I'm sure.
Through Looney Tunes. And this movie definitely did it, because Tress MacNeille is, like, one of the only voice actors from the original show to come back. We're not fans of the original show, by the way. I mean, I wouldn't say so. I don't think I even really watched it as a kid, but I appreciate it.
I'm aware of its existence.
It's got a good theme song.
Yeah.
But Tress MacNeille, they brought her back because I guess they figured, like, oh, it's only a couple lines, whatever. But of course, you know, they recasted Chip and Dale. That's kind of to be expected because their voice had a filter on it anyway, and they want it to be a star vehicle, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
But Monterey Jack, like, the voice actor for Monterey Jack was in the movie already, like, 5 times. And they were like, well, Monterey Jack's got a significant amount of lines in there. Should we give it to Jim Cummings? No. You know who we're going to give it to? Eric Bana.
Yeah, what's Eric Bana up to?
Nothing. He played Hulk in the 2003 Ang Lee Hulk.
Time Traveler's Wife.
Like, yeah. Why? Why Eric Bana instead of the guy who did it, who you're hiring anyway to do all of his other famous roles?
Well, I don't know. To me, it was like Jim Cummings was like, I don't want to do it. You think? In my head, he was like, I don't want to do it for whatever reason. But he's like, I'll do all these other things.
I don't know why he would say that.
It seems weird.
Jim Cummings is a legend, by the way.
He is a legend.
He's awesome.
I was excited to hear him as Pooj.
The bootleg?
That really got me for some reason. He was like, Pooj, the fat honey bear.
Oh, I'm gonna rumbly in my tumbly.
Yeah, it really got me.
Yeah. He's a great... This is what I'm saying. One of my favorite documentaries is called I Know That Voice. It's a documentary about voice actors. And I love the realm of voice actors. I love going on behindthevoiceactors.com and researching who played what and what else and all that. So I love voice actors. I love the craft, and I respect the crap out of them. And to just hear Andy Samberg and John Mulaney just, like, walking into the studio being like, all right, give me the paycheck. I'm going to read the lines. Hey, I'm Andy Samberg. I'm Dale. All right, see you later, guys. I'm going home for the day. It just feels like so disrespectful to so many talented voice actors out there who could have done so much more with that role. Yeah. Not that the material was amazing.
I don't disagree. I mean, that in mind, though, Toy Story, one of your favorite films of all time, was a star vehicle as well, with Tom Hanks and Tim Allen as the lead. You know, they weren't really voice actors before that.
However, Toy Story had these new characters. Woody and Buzz was brand new, you know? As the kid from Back to the Future would say. Another Robert Zemeckis joint.
That's true.
Toy Story had new characters, whereas this was, as I said, previously established characters. It's Space Jam. Sorry, when I said Space Jam earlier, I think I meant Space Jam 2, the new one.
Right.
Recasting people.
It was like, okay, we need to bring in, I think, like, Zendaya was...
Yeah, Lola Bunny.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's the same sort of thing where Chip and Dale recasted roles that already had iconic voice actors voicing them, but Tom Hanks and Tim Allen were coming to Woody and Buzz fresh. So that's more understandable, you know? Especially because I do think that Tom Hanks is really talented and brought a lot to that role. And I
agree.
And so did Tim Allen.
I think they're a good example of the use of that because, you know, when you think of Woody, you think of Woody. You're not just like, to me anyways, you're not just hearing, oh, this is Tom Hanks, like, reading in a booth. Right,
exactly. Like, you can't say Woody could be played by anybody. If Toy Story 4 had come out and Woody was played by somebody else, unless maybe it was Jim Hanks, it would have been a disaster.
I agree.
It would have been garbage, you know? But, like, Rescue Rangers could have had anybody in those roles, and they probably would have done a better job.
Yeah, maybe. I don't, like, again, like, I wasn't expecting it to be, like, a flawless film. I was like, this is going to be one of those films that you just throw on.
Oh, really? I was expecting it to be flawless.
Oh, okay.
With the Andy Samberg touch, I mean, come on.
Well, it was like, to me, sometimes I like to watch kind of crappy, in my mind, crappy films, like, you know, like Knocked Up. It's like, I'm not expecting that I'm gonna love Knocked Up, but I'm just gonna watch it because, you know, I can, like, turn my brain off.
Okay, so yeah, that brings into question, like, why did I have such high expectations for this? Mm-hmm. And that leads us right into Roger Rabbit, which is that shared DNA that I talked about before. Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers is a clear send-up of Roger Rabbit.
Definitely.
Not just because it involves animated characters being in a live-action world, but because it's trying to do that same thing of bringing these animated characters from different movies and TV and stuff and putting them in the same world for these little cameos and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't buy the argument that it's not a tribute, a send-up to Roger Rabbit, because there's clues all throughout it, right? So I don't know if you noticed this, but there's a scene where they bump a lamp in Chip 'n Dale. I think it's the scene where, like, they're flung through a window into the bathroom. They bump the lamp. That's a clear reference to bumping the lamp in Roger Rabbit.
Yeah.
Which we watched a video essay that involved that. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about necessarily, I have Andy's Trivia Corner. Once again, when Eddie takes Roger Rabbit into the back room at the bar where Dolores works to cut apart the handcuffs, the lamp from the ceiling is bumped and swinging. Lots of extra work was needed to make the shadows match between the actual room shots and the animation. Today, bump the lamp is a term used by many Disney employees to refer to going that extra mile on an effect just to make it a little more special, even though most audience members will never notice it. Did you clock that?
About the lamp?
In Chip 'n Dale.
That they bumped the lamp? No, I don't think that I did.
So I actually rewound it when we watched it, and I think you were kind of like, what are you doing? During a bathroom break, just to see, like, it's very intentional. They bump the lamp, and the whole point of bumping the lamp is that with the swinging light, you're casting shadows and light back and forth, which makes the animation a lot more difficult, which is why that scene is now so famous in Roger Rabbit, that the animators had to do so much extra work to really sell the effect.
Right.
And I thought it was so ironic that they chose to do a send-up to Roger Rabbit in that way, because I found the animation specifically on Chip in this movie to be absolute garbage.
Yeah, in my mind, it was, I mean, maybe this is just out of laziness, but I thought that they were throwing it back to the style that it was originally from. So the style it was originally from didn't have, lots of light and shadow detail, whereas more modern animation has a lot of that.
Right. I actually fundamentally disagree with that, because what I saw on the animation of mainly Chip, but also like Monterey Jack and the other characters from the show and a couple of other animated characters here and there, was a total cheat. What I saw wasn't that they were like, okay, let's put pen to paper and draw out Chip and draw the animation frames and have it look like the animation on Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers. To me, it was so clear that they made a 3D model of Chip and then animated the 3D model to look 2D so that they wouldn't actually have to draw animation frames and could just save time and money by totally cheating and not doing 2D animation at all. And I thought it looked terrible. That's
probably correct.
And it looked kind of like, I don't know if you've ever seen the film A Scanner Darkly.
Mm-mm.
It's like a weird, what's the director who did School of Rock? I always forget his name. School of Rock and Before Sunset, Sunrise. Yeah. That guy. Not Hitchcock.
No, I wasn't saying Hitchcock.
Hey, Google, who directed School of Rock?
No, you're going to set everyone's Googles off.
Richard Linklater. It's a Richard Linklater film with Keanu Reeves and Robert Downey Jr., where they do like rotoscoping. So like they filmed the whole movie and then they rotoscoped the actors. But because it's rotoscoped, it doesn't look 2D. It looks 3D. Or maybe they just recreated it in 3D. I'm not sure. But what I'm getting at is in this movie, all those characters who are supposedly 2D, that was a total irony to me, was that there's supposed to be like a distinction between Chip, who is 2D, and Dale, who is 3D.
Right.
And all detailed out in CGI and stuff. But Chip and those other characters were so clearly, to me, 3D models that, like, sure, if you paused the movie, they look 2D. But the way they move, you can tell that they're like three-dimensional objects with lines moving around them. And I thought, again, that seemed so lazy. And such an ironic difference between Roger Rabbit and this was in Roger Rabbit, they're like, we're going to put in the extra effort to have all these layers with like, the track mask and the shadow and the highlights and all that to make sure that everything looks correct. And then Chip and Dale was like, no, we're just going to kind of cheat it and save time.
Yeah, there was some things that they were like holding things, and I feel like the shadows didn't really line up sometimes. Like if he was holding like a piece of cake or something, it's like, well, the lighting on the cake looks completely different than him.
Right.
And I feel like a technique in, you can correct me on this because you probably remember more of this. A technique in 2D animation is you like motion blur.
Mm-hmm.
So you make it look like it's a smooth motion, but it's not. And it's a very specific style and vibe.
Yeah.
That if you're doing like sort of a flash animation,
smearing, I think is what you're thinking
computer animation hand-drawn thing, it won't always look like that original style.
Right. So it's kind of like you draw the main keyframes. That's where the term comes from, keyframes.
Right.
And then the in-betweens, the tweening sort of, is like slightly, if they're making like swift, rapid movements, can be slightly messier. So if you watch it as it's animated and as it's played back, it looks nice and smooth. But if you were to pause it in the middle of that motion, you would see the character's features all like smeared like that. But that's a deliberate technique to really like sell that motion blur.
And I feel like this isn't apparent in that, and that's what makes it feel jarring to our eyes. It's the same thing as we're used to seeing films as like 24 frames per second. And then if you have a film that's like 60 frames per second, you're like, this doesn't feel right.
Yeah. So the laziness of the animation is just something that kept taking me out of the movie, and I just couldn't get past. And I actually have a few visual aids here for you. I'm gonna show you these on my phone. You saw me taking pictures of the TV screen. Yeah. And you were like, what are you doing? I was like, I'm prepping for the podcast. So for those of you at home, I'll superimpose these pictures in the video version. Audio listeners,
I'll describe.
Sorry, you're out of luck.
No, I'll describe the photos.
So here, I've got some stuff from Roger Rabbit. You can see my main complaint was that every frame of Chip from Chip and Dale, Chip like lifted right out. He may as well have been a sticker on the frame. He didn't look like he belonged in the scene as well.
Yeah.
Right? So we look at this scene. It's one of the first scenes in Roger Rabbit. And you see the lighting on him is consistent with the lighting in the set around him.
That's true.
And then as he walks into the shadow, he gets darker. And you see spill from reflected objects around him. He gets dark. And then when he walks underneath this light, the part of him that's pointing towards the light is brighter. And the backside of him that's facing towards the shadow is darker. Right? Mm-hmm. This is like lighting 101. It's like match the character to the scene that's lit around you, you know?
Yeah.
And it's not just with animation, but with live action filmmaking, you'll have an incidental light in the scene that probably isn't throwing that much light on your actor, but you want your off-camera lighting to be coming from the same direction as that incidental lighting, right? So then as he continues to walk out of that scene, he walks into the doorway and you can see the way that the light bends around him from the side that it's hitting him down to the shadowy side, right?
That's true, yeah.
And you might be thinking like, that's obvious. That's how you would light a character that's in a scene, right?
With animation, that's a lot trickier.
Right. But then if we go to Chip and Dale here, you can see in this frame here, it looks like Chip is a sticker placed right on the frame. You see that Dale is lit with lighting coming from outside. That's like bluish light. Yeah. Lighting coming from the right side, bluish light that fades to shadow in the middle of his face that wraps around to lighting coming from the inside. That's orange light. That's like tungsten light. And then we move over to Chip and it's just like, no, completely flat, even lighting.
That's true.
And it's even more apparent in this here. You see Dale is completely shrouded in darkness. You almost can't even see him. Whereas Chip is, again, completely evenly lit. And as Dale walks out of the darkness and more light is spilled on his face, Chip still looks exactly the same. And then finally, when Dale walks into the light and they start to look like they're in the same light, Chip looks exactly the same as he's looked walking through that entire dark hallway. It's just like garbage animation. It's trash.
Yeah, that's really a shame though, because I've seen really great 2D animation that has good use of shadows, like Batman the Animated Series, Steven Universe, etc.
Yeah, and like this movie was made in 2022 or 2021, I assume, with a budget of $70 million. I guarantee you that some lonely independent animator who's sitting at home would have loved to have put his all into 2D traditionally animating Chip in those scenes for like $200 a day. I guarantee you.
Well, yeah.
Or like a lot less than however much money it costs to animate Chip in those scenes.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And I got a couple more examples here. Like here, there's a character who looks dimly lit because he's in a room that's dimly lit, you know? And we go to Jessica Rabbit here. She's standing in the spotlight. And as she walks in front of the spotlight, between the camera and the spotlight, she gets dark because the light's no longer shining on her face.
Right, and she's backlit by the spotlight.
Yeah, and the light bends her around her in a realistic way. And as she interacts with Eddie and puts her hand in his jacket, it looks like she's part of the scene and it sells the effect because they put in the effort to animate them in such a way that it looks like they're in front of the camera. Mm-hmm. Who'da thunk? And again, the irony is that Chip and Dale totally did this. For Dale only.
I'm guessing it's easier to do it in 3D animation.
Who's to say?
Well, because why would they do it for one character and then not for the other?
I don't know. Maybe it was an intentional effect, but to me like,
it seems like
I could have done better. I could have animated Chip better, and I am not an animator. I swear. Give me a year.
That's a bold statement.
Give me a year, and I could have done a better job.
Okay. Well, I know you're a very talented person that is persistent.
In some things, maybe. But.
So, if you were given a year, maybe.
Maybe. But maybe. It just shows the lack of effort. It was
intentional.
It shows lack of effort to me. That they were just like, yep, doesn't matter what environment Chip is in, just animate him and just like stick him in there and whatever, it doesn't matter, you know?
It seems like they were trying to make him look less lifelike though. Like, I feel like a lot of more modern animation embraces shadows and texture, and it's like almost maybe like a little too realistic looking. Like Pixar movies, you can always see like detail on like a sweater or something.
So how do you rationalize that then, based on what we just saw in Roger Rabbit? Like, do you think that Roger Rabbit went too far in terms of shadow and lighting and made Roger look too realistic? Or do you think, as I feel, that Roger looks like a cartoon character in a live action world?
I definitely think that they took way more steps to make cartoon and humans integrated in Roger Rabbit.
And do you think it was successful? Do you think it looked good?
I think it was successful because they purposely were doing manipulation with props to get like the correct lighting. Yeah. And then they animated afterwards and they were very consistent and aware of what kind of tonal quality is hitting the characters.
Yeah, they put in the time and effort. So that movie was made in 1988, you know?
Yeah.
That's a long time in between then and 2022. I feel like there's no excuse for them not to put that level of care and attention into the animation of Chip and Dale.
Mm-hmm. I would imagine that doing animated lighting is a lot easier these days. Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, because I know there's certain techniques and certain software where you can place where your lights are and where the camera, the audience is supposed to be in the scene to do animating techniques like that. So that's a lot easier than just, observing the quality of light and then trying to draw it to the specifications. There's a lot more cheats these days to achieve those effects.
Yeah. So I think instead of animating like one stock Chip that looks the same basically no matter where you put him, they should have animated like a 3D test version of Chip to place in a virtual lighting scheme to understand how the light would be hitting him in that scene, and then use that as a reference to draw a 2D version of Chip.
That is a good idea, yeah.
Because honestly, now that I'm thinking about it even more, what it seems like they were doing was trying to say, oh, look how good the animation is on Dale. Isn't CGI, ultra hyper-realistic animation, the way of the future, And doesn't Chip with his stupid 2D animation, doesn't he look like crap? Doesn't he look like garbage? Yeah, 2D animation's the thing of the past. Now it seems like that's what they're doing.
That's possible. I think it's just show more comparison, contrast, like look how hyper-realistic Dale looks and, Chip looks like he's from the 80s.
Yeah.
Like a TV cartoon.
Okay, so let me take a deep breath here. I'm going to calm down a bit. Let's take a trip back to Andy's Trivia Corner and read my second and final piece of trivia for Chip and Dale because I didn't find anything else as interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Towards the start of the film, there's a shot of a director who says, "And cut. That's a wrap, folks." And this is actually, I clocked this when I was watching it, and I was like, it kind of looks like Steven Spielberg. You know who it was?
Who?
It was Akiva dressed up as Steven Spielberg.
That is really funny.
And that's all the interesting trivia for Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers.
It feels like it's definitely a send-up as well to Roger Rabbit because Steven Spielberg was like a producer on it.
Yeah, and a frequent collaborator of Robert Zemeckis.
Correct.
And, I didn't quite finish what I was saying that started this whole animation debate with Bumping the Lamp. Bumping the Lamp was not the only reference to Roger Rabbit in Chip and Dale. I think Roger Rabbit, if not Roger and Jessica Rabbit, made an appearance in the movie. But then on top of that, there was a scene...
about Jessica Rabbit.
Yeah, there was a scene where one of the characters rolls out just a thing. I don't know what to call it. A little pocket, a little rolled up thing with sleeves in it that had stuff in pockets. What do you call that?
A rolled up sleeve that had stuff in...
a rolled up thing that has pockets in... Never mind.
I have no idea what you're talking
moving
about.
on. In one of those little pockets is a can of dip.
Okay.
Okay,
yeah.
Roger Rabbit.
Sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
So that's like at least 3 clear references to Roger Rabbit, 4 if you count Steven Spielberg, that say to me that they were really trying to say this is a modern day Roger Rabbit. And as far as I'm concerned, they missed the mark so hard.
They tried.
No, they didn't. They didn't try. Well, they tried. They tried for Dale. They tried for J.K. Simmons' character, who I actually loved.
Because it's a send up to your favorite Gumby.
I do love me some Gumby. I love Gumby the movie from the 90s. Available on Tubi. Go watch it.
See, that's sort of a thing that it's like, this is an adult reference. I mean, and a kid can enjoy it, but it's like, Gumby is super old.
But I didn't love that character just because he was a send-up of Gumby. I loved the character because I loved the way he looked. I loved the way he moved, the way that he was animated. I loved the way he was voiced. I love J.K. Simmons, but they tailored that character so well to J.K. Simmons and his movements. He moved in such a funny way. The lighting... I just spent like 10 minutes complaining about how the lighting on Chip didn't match the scene. The lighting on J.K. Simmons' character, I think his name was like Officer Putty, was beautiful and fantastic. I love the way that I think they animated him on 2s, which is like having 2 frames per frame, I guess.
That's more of an old school, like 2D sort of technique,
right?
Which is what I'm saying is with Chip, it made him look weird because they weren't animating on 2s.
Yeah, and I know that J.K. Simmons' character was not legitimate stop motion, but the way they animated him looked convincing. It looked like stop motion, and that character was a pleasure to watch and to listen to because he just looked good on screen, and he interacted with the characters very well. And actually, my favorite scene in the whole movie was the scene where he's fighting Ellie, I think the character's name was.
Correct.
The black officer.
Yeah.
That scene was great because it didn't involve Chip and Dale at all. And the animation really looked like the animated character was interacting with the real world, which is
Yeah, I
what
thought that
Roger
was good.
Rabbit sold so hard. Especially in the scene in Roger Rabbit where Eddie Valiant is like, Roger's like holding on to something and Eddie's like grabbing Roger's pant legs and like pulling him back and pulling him back. It really looked like he was pulling a cartoon character.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not to say that the animation in Roger Rabbit was flawless. It definitely wasn't.
No.
It was made in 1988. Some stuff is dated.
It has some like blurry, like, especially if the characters are more in the background, you see them kind of like blurry, like shaking. The animation shaking. Up close, it's a lot better.
Right, because they didn't have like motion tracking software to keep them in the same spot in the frame.
That's fine. I mean, yeah, it's old.
But stuff like, you know, when the animated characters were in the real world, I thought it looked really good. But when the real characters were in the animated world, like when Eddie goes to Toontown, not as good.
No, it doesn't hold up as much. I think part of the reason why it just doesn't look as good is because Dean Cudney, such an amazing director of photography, so good at lighting, is
The Thing, Jurassic Park, you said? Yeah.
And Back to the Future.
Did he do Back to the Future too?
Back to the Future as well? Yes.
No, I mean, yes, as well. Not Back to the Future 2.
I'm assuming he did all three, but definitely the first one.
But probably Back to the Future 2 as well.
Correct.
Yes.
So he did all those amazingly well-lit films, and you can tell, like, part of the reason why the animation looks so good is because they were using his established lighting as a reference.
Which looks excellent.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So then when they go into the cartoon world, it just doesn't look as good shadow and stuff-wise.
That's very true, yeah.
Because they weren't using, like, his dynamic lighting as the reference.
Right.
As much.
I guess in order to sell that effect, because a lot of cartoon imagery, especially in Toontown, just looks like flat, even lighting. Sort of how Chip looked in Rescue Rangers.
Yeah.
The only way to sell that effect on Eddie would have been to completely light him in flat, even lighting. But that's exactly my point, is that the beginning of Roger Rabbit, it starts out with a scene that's completely animated. And in that scene, you have that flat, even lighting that you see on Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, not the movie, but the TV show, right? Is that flat, even lighting. But that's because that is a cartoon character in a cartoon world with cartoon lighting. It's once you bring a cartoon character into a live action world that you then need to start matching the lighting and making sure it looks like a real character in front of the camera.
Mm-hmm. That's a fair thing.
Right.
Because that was part of my thing is like, yeah, it's supposed to look really flat because the cartoon was flat. But if he's interacting with the real world, which is why I think that, yeah, like Eddie Valiant, this is his name?
Yep.
He doesn't look as good because he doesn't have like the shadows and stuff interacting with him.
Yeah.
As we were saying.
Bob Hoskins, equalization between the sexes.
That's right.
Spice
Girls
World
reference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He was in that movie for about 2 seconds.
It was funny though. It was a memorable part.
Yeah, he was also Mario.
Yeah. Let's not talk about that.
Uh-huh.
What I do appreciate about Chip 'n Dale is that they were trying to mix a lot of different techniques and mediums.
Mm-hmm.
So like they had the 2000s Uncanny Valley animation, which I actually wish that they had explored a little bit more. It's basically more of like they showed a couple different versions and then Seth Rogen's character.
What would have been really funny if they had a real character from Polar Express in there.
That would have been funny. I feel like that was part of the thing that made it so cool about Who Framed Roger Rabbit is they had like really big name characters.
Yeah, like Bugs Bunny, Mickey Mouse, Daffy Duck, and the other duck. What's his name? Donald, that's the one.
Those were pretty big scenes, and they had Porky Pig, like being like,
yeah,
that's all, folks, and stuff. So
Betty
like
Boop and Dumbo, Pinocchio.
Those are big references.
Now we have Ugly Sonic, and
whereas it's like this is a Disney movie. You couldn't pull out the big guns. Like the other film, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, wasn't even Disney. They just borrowed characters from Disney.
Yeah. They actually, they had like a clause. I don't know if I put this down in the trivia, but one of the clauses of being able to use the Disney characters was that they had to get as much screen time as the Warner Brothers characters, which is why you always see Bugs and Mickey on screen at the same time and Donald and Daffy on screen at the same time, so they get equal screen time.
Right, so you're telling me that Disney in modern day, who owns, like, basically everything, couldn't have, like, lots of cool references to things?
Yeah, like they could have stuck in Mickey for like one line. In Roger Rabbit, Mickey talks about getting killed. He's like, "Oh, if you don't have a parachute, you're gonna get killed."
That's what makes it so funny. And it's like you're telling me Disney that owns Mickey Mouse, very famously a copyright law thing,
Yeah.
couldn't just have, like, you know, Chip be like, "Hey, what's up? I haven't seen you in a long time." Mickey, like, some kind of animation reunion or I don't know.
But then that brings in a bigger topic, which is like all those references in Roger Rabbit wasn't what made Roger Rabbit good. It's not a good movie because you see Bugs Bunny and Daffy and Porky Pig and all that on screen occupying the same space. It was good because it had good actors and good music and good animation, good lighting, good pacing. It was a good movie, you know?
Yeah.
Rescue Rangers isn't going to be good because it has a bunch of Seth Rogen characters appearing at once going, although that was very funny.
Really? I feel like they purposely put that in, like, let's put in his stupid cartoon laugh.
It was funny. You didn't think that was funny? That was like the only time during the whole movie that I snickered a little bit. I was like, okay, Seth Rogen on Seth Rogen. That's kind of funny.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know.
You didn't think that was funny?
That didn't chuckle me as much as some of the other things.
As much as John Mulaney being like, somebody called me on my landline.
That can't be good.
That's your kind of humor?
But I thought it was so funny because it was clearly like him just talking and it was stupid. Like,
it was stupid.
It was so dry. It was like, someone called me on my landline. That can't be good. Like, it was so
It's still cracking
stupid.
you up.
It was so stupid. So subversive. Like, I feel like one of the problems with Chip and Dale is it was referencing things and being like, isn't this dumb? But then they did it. And it was like, is it funny that they're doing it or is it dumb? Like, they're like, you know, let's play our theme song played by a pop star. And, you know, it's like...
that nobody's gonna like, yeah.
It's like, that's kind of funny that you're referencing this thing that we have a problem with. Like, in Charlie Brown, they had, like, lots of pop music. And it's like, music. Charlie Brown is all about jazz. Like, you telling me you couldn't put cool jazz music in it?
Instead, it's a stupid pop song.
Right. So I thought it was kind of funny that they were referencing it. But it's like, but you're doing the thing that you're saying is stupid. So, like, is it brilliant or is it stupid?
This was another point, is that they're trying to seem like they're self-aware, right? Like that they're in on the joke and being like, we're not going to have animated characters rap. All movies do that these days and it's dumb. Oh, here we go. Look at me. I'm rapping. How did that happen? It's like, you're not in on the joke. You're not self-aware if you're still doing it. You're acknowledging it, but you're not understanding why it's stupid and why you shouldn't do it because you're still doing it.
Okay, but I still thought it was mildly funny that they weren't good at rapping. That they kept on being like, and I'm a whale. And it's like, yeah, because real characters don't know how to rap.
Well, you know what? Interestingly enough, that also seemed like a reference to Roger Rabbit because Eddie Valiant does that at the end too. He's trying to make the weasels laugh and he's like, oh, I'm going to sing a little song here, but he's not good at that. That's not his thing. So he has trouble coming up with lyrics. Yeah. So it's like they lifted that idea right from Who Framed Roger Rabbit. But like Roger Rabbit, it was in character for Eddie Valiant to not be able to sing a little silly song because he's a detective. He's not a tune. That's not his thing. But for Chip and Dale Rescue Rangers to be like, oh, we're going to do a rap and it's funny. It's like, it's not funny. You're pointing out that it's dumb that movies do this these days, but then you're still doing it. So like, it's true. Like you don't understand.
Yeah, I think it would have been good if Dale did a decent rap because, you know, he's from Lonely Island. So that would have maybe been an interesting sort of reference. Like, oh, Dale is actually really good at rapping because, you know, in real life, they have like, they rap or whatever. But I think it would have been in character for Chip not to know what to do. And then maybe like Dale assists him with coming up with some kind of pattern.
See, that's fair. But why does anybody need to rap at all? No. Why does this have to be a thing?
Yeah, like, people were pretty ruthless about Porky Pig rapping in Space Jam 2, rightfully so. It's like, you're trying to be cool.
Stop trying to be cool.
Stop trying to be cool. Exactly. It's like Porky Pig is like a character from the 40s.
Yeah.
Do we really need to like 2020ify him? That was one of my problems when we watched Space Jam 2, the trailer. I was like, oh, isn't it great that they're like 2D animation still? And then they like turned into 3D. Like, oh, we're going to turn into 3D now. I'm like, oh, you ruined it.
Yeah, best believe I had a problem with that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, and going back to the rapping for a second, like, why does it seem like all movies have to do this now? If it's not a rap sequence, it's a pop song. Or if it's not a pop song, it's a dance sequence. Like, we saw Sonic the Hedgehog 2, which I actually really liked. I'm a big Sonic fan, and I thought it was great, and it had a lot of fan service. But the worst part of the movie was the stupid dance scene that they do in the middle of the movie to the stupid song that I don't even remember what it was because it was so stupid. Uptown Funk. Let's get Sonic dancing to Uptown Funk because that's what animated movies do these days. Like, why does this have to happen at all? Just don't do it and move on.
They're trying to appeal to what they think kids want, but it's like,
is that what kids really want?
Kids don't. It's what they think kids want.
If that's like, what kids really want, then maybe they are as dumb as movie or studios think.
But it's like kids are gonna enjoy things the same in a similar way that an adult would. Okay. So like, why are we trying to assume what a kid is gonna enjoy?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's like the same thing when we were watching the Pokemon movie. It's like the Pokemon movie. You know, they're known for having various video game stings and various music stings in the show, but there was still pop music, and it's like...
By the Pokemon movie, you mean Pokemon the first movie.
Correct.
Like with Mewtwo.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they came out with that soundtrack, and it's like, who is this music pleasing, right? Because if we think about it, like, what is a movie from your childhood that had some sort of, like, pop song, like, smack dab in the middle of it that was totally out of place, that you were like, as a kid, you were like, yeah, this is awesome.
See, I can't even think of anything because as a kid, I enjoyed like adult stuff.
Right.
Like Mel Brooks movies.
Toy Story didn't need a pop song in the middle of it. It needed songs by Randy Newman that fit the vibe that the movie was going for.
It was still a modern, quote unquote, modern artist, but Randy Newman is so peculiar. That
He's
it's
so
like
talented.
it doesn't fit the usual mode.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I really don't enjoy that. Like, it's just, you know, I wish they would just keep the vibe of what they're going for. Like, you know, Peanuts is jazz and Rescue Rangers, they could have done more like 80s. Orchestral, sure. Yeah. 80s type music instead of making it like synth sounding. And it's like, I know that they're referencing the thing, but they still do the thing.
Yeah, so. Like we're talking both about the rapping scene as well as the Post Malone cover of the theme song. Like, they outright say it. They're like, is this when we're going to have like a pop music version of the theme song, even though nobody wants to hear it and they just want to hear the original? And then they do it. It's like, it was funny that you acknowledged that's a thing that nobody wants, but then you still did it. So it's like you don't understand why it's a bad thing and why people don't like it. You're saying nobody wants this, and then you're doing it anyway. Think through it. Like, why are you making this decision and putting this cover of this song in here, also acknowledging that nobody wants to hear it? Why is that a decision that you're making?
I don't know.
You know, it's like when the first Transformers movie came out, the 2007 one, and it didn't have the theme song. And people were like, why doesn't it have the theme song? That's like the most iconic part of Transformers. It's like robots in disguise. You know, it's so like, true. That's what people want to hear.
Agreed.
Right? And so Rescue Rangers came off as so tone deaf, right? It's like Roger Rabbit, because we just watched it. It seemed to me like Roger Rabbit was made by people who love classic animation. Would you agree with that?
That's true. And I just, you know, Robert Zemeckis is such a great director, and he does
Most
sort
of the time.
Sure. He does sort of the thing that I've heard BJ Novak say. It's like, if you want to be considered a good director, you do like some weird technique things.
Sure. Yeah, you know, to make yourself stand out at the very least, right?
Right.
Above the crowd.
Right. Whereas, like, Chip and Dale, there was nothing too remarkable about the cinematography or the camera movements.
Right.
It just was.
And just the reason why the movie existed is, again, like Roger Rabbit seemed like it was made by people who love classic animation in order to show off, you know, pushing the limits of classic animation and doing new things with it. Whereas Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers seemed like it was made by people who were trying to capitalize on nostalgia.
Mm-hmm. Well, part of it is Roger Rabbit was made in the 80s, but it takes place in the 40s.
Yeah.
As a send
which I
up,
love.
As a send up to Looney Tunes.
Yeah.
Whereas this is 80s characters in the 2020s.
Hate it.
Wouldn't it be more interesting if it was in the 80s?
Or the 90s even. 90s is hot right now.
You would get, that's true. You would get a lot of nostalgia boost. It would have been good if it was like Chip 'n Dale, they're like top dogs or whatever, and then it's the 90s and they're considered over the hill and like there's new guys in town.
Yeah, and they could even
that could have been interesting.
They could play with all the stupid stuff that Disney did in the 90s when it came to like Disney Afternoon. It's like trying to make things cool in the 90s. And we're gonna have Huey, Dewey, and Louie with cool haircuts, putting their hands in their pockets and slumping against the wall, you know.
Right.
And this is a bad example, but like Goofy Movie kind of did that, except Goofy Movie did it successfully, I would argue. Is trying to like modernize and make things. What?
I'm just thinking of the second one where it's like, we're doing the X Games.
Yes,
Goofy Goof is on a skateboard.
That is an example of doing it unsuccessfully, of
Sure.
trying to update Disney characters to make them cool, right? But then instead of doing the whole CGI thing, like, hey, I'm Dale, I'm Andy Samberg, and I got CGI'd, they could have tried to make him like 90s cool Dale, which I'm sure they probably did. There probably exists a Chip 'n Dale show from the 90s where they were like skateboarding or something, or
probably,
right? But
so I think that could be really interesting, because part of the appeal for me with Who Framed Roger Rabbit is, you know, the period piece clothing. And, you know, the old style animation cartoons like the Looney Tunes and Betty Boop and all that kind of stuff.
Right. Well, calming down a little bit, is it Bill Murray trivia time?
Absolutely. I don't know why you would reference him, but, you know.
Well, here we go.
Here we go.
I'll tell you what, on the special edition DVD, Robert Zemeckis recounts that he had stated in a newspaper interview that Bill Murray was his and executive producer Steven Spielberg's original choice for the role of Eddie Valiant.
Oh, he would have been so good.
But neither could get in contact with him in time. As it happens, Bill Murray in turn stated that when he read the interview, he was in a public place and screamed his lungs out because he would have definitely accepted the role.
He would have been so good, because he, to me, is one of the better parts of Space Jam. he just injects like,
all comes back to Space Jam.
It's funny, but it's like he just feels like he fits in with cartoon characters somehow.
Yeah.
He's such a good actor where he can play such dark, dramatic scenes and just, you know, dry sense of humor.
Right. I think if it had been Bill Murray, he would have maybe brought a little too much Peter Venkman to the role.
A little too shticky in his, like, I'm thinking like Jim Carrey in his heyday, like where it's like, I'm Jim Carrey.
Yeah, but like 1988, I think that's probably pretty close to Ghostbusters.
That's true.
So I don't think he would have brought as much to the role as Bob Hoskins, because I do think Bob Hoskins brought a lot to the role. Like Bob Hoskins is English. Like he has like a UK accent.
That's interesting.
And so that to me says that he you know, tried hard at this role to create and craft a character. And it felt like a real character, you know?
Definitely.
It didn't feel like it was just Bob Hoskins or just Andy Samberg being like, hey, I'm Andy Samberg.
If it was Bill Murray, I would have been somewhat self-aware that it was, you know, this is Bill Murray. Like any role he's in, even, you know, I love Bill Murray.
Me too.
But it's always like, it's Bill Murray dressed up as a character. There's always like a shade of that. He doesn't really like fade away into a role.
Right. He always brings his Bill Murray-ness with him to the party.
That's what you're looking for most of the time.
Most of the time. Right. But yeah, I think Bob Hoskins did a great job. And I have one final piece of trivia here. To get the feel of acting with cartoon characters, Bob Hoskins studied his 3-year-old daughter playing with her imaginary friends.
Aww.
I think that's really interesting. to act as if you're like, hey, there's nobody in front of me right now, but I'm going to pretend like I'm looking at somebody who has a consistent eye line and who's going to be interacting with me, even though I can't reach out and touch them.
That's true.
I think that takes talent.
I agree. I feel like with Ellie in one of the scenes in Chip and Dale where she's like supposed to be looking at them through a window. I think this is definitely maybe like the script supervisor's fault or something.
Yeah.
Is like they're not really on screen at the same time. She's looking through the window and they're looking at her. And I feel like her eye line is too high to actually be looking at them.
Right.
But it's like she didn't know, the actor didn't know because she probably didn't, like, there was nothing there or, you know, whatever. It was different than the animation. It's like they should have been keeping track of that better. I don't know.
Right. Well, I guess to wrap up our thoughts, I would give Chip and Dale maybe a 5 out of 10, which is very low for me. I think I would normally give a movie like this a 6 out of 10, just based on how much I didn't like it. But because there was so much wasted potential in what it could have done,
yeah,
I'm gonna do a 5 out of 10 or 2.5 out of 5. What would you give it out of 5 out of 10? Whatever you want.
Let me just give some final thoughts.
Yeah.
There was a couple moments that I snickered at, and I did overall enjoy myself. There was definitely wasted potential. I felt like they could have done so much more with the different IPs that they had, and you know, they could have done a different story. I didn't mind that it was like a mission because they were Rescue Rangers, so that was kind of cool.
Yeah, I didn't like hate Sergeant everything Petty about it, but
I like that there was a Muppet. You know, I like that there was different references to things.
One aspect that we might be missing out on here is fan service to the original Rescue Rangers. Like, maybe if you were a big Rescue Rangers fan and you've seen every episode and you're watching this, that there would be a lot there for you. That's part of why I enjoyed Lightyear so much, is because I'm a big Toy Story fan and I watched the Buzz Lightyear Star Command TV show and I felt like integrated into that world. And so I recognized things and it felt like things in that movie were there for me. And I was like, I enjoy this, you know, but I recognize that people who don't like Buzz Lightyear or Toy Story as much really hated that movie. So we might be coming at this, or I might be coming at this from the perspective of somebody who hasn't seen all that. And the same with Sonic 2. I loved Sonic 2 because I'm a Sonic fan. Mm-hmm. But if you came at it not as a Sonic fan, you probably hate it.
There was some to like about Sonic 2, and it was an enjoyable watching experience, but I didn't love everything about it, and it had the annoying pop music.
Right.
And it's like you could have used original source music.
Yeah.
For
fan service.
For fan service.
Yeah. So if you're a big fan of the original Rescue Rangers, and you felt like this had a lot to offer for other fans, feel free to weigh in, drop a comment or something, and let us know how that experience was for you. But Hannah, you were wrapping up your thoughts on the movie in general. Can get back to that.
My thought at the end is when they were doing sort of the big fight with Peter Pan turned into a cat, is they're maybe doing a reference to the Chip and Dale video game where they were sort of platforming up of like a pole. There was like boxes in like a dock, and like there was like a red light on top. I feel like that was something that would have been in the video game.
Interesting, yeah. Could have been.
And so things that I did like about it is, so there's a part where Dale is like, I'm gonna wear a top hat and a suit, and like it's totally gonna go correctly. Like they're just gonna be all about this. Mm-hmm. And Chip's like, no, you're an idiot. And it's like, normally in a movie like that, it's like, oh, it does go according to plan. But to them, it got them captured. Right. And it's like, well, yeah, of course that's not gonna work because that's stupid. And so then so I'm glad that they didn't do like movie logic in that way.
Yeah.
And they were also trying to be a bit subversive, that they were trying to plant that Ellie was the one that was going against the back, but then they're like, no, it was actually Putty. And it's like,
so cliche.
Why don't fix what's not broken? I was like, that's kind of funny that they're kind of like being subversive by being
non-subversive.
Subversive, yeah. So that
I'll give it points for that.
That was pretty good.
And speaking of the wardrobe, real quick, when you're talking about the top hat, when they were like, "Oh, just disguise yourself in anything," and they pop out of the Indiana Jones place, and he has the hat and jacket that was similar to what he wore in Rescue Rangers. Even though I was like mentally checked out of most of the movie and falling asleep and like really not into it, I did get that like rush to my heart and brain, that little serotonin hit, seeing him in that outfit, and I was like, oh, that's cool.
And they played the Indiana Jones music, which is great. I love that music.
Again, Steven Spielberg reference. It all connects.
Well, I'm sure, like, they're kids of the 80s, the Lonely Island guys.
Right.
Like, that would have...
That's true.
All of this is, like, probably super nostalgic to them. They're probably, like, huge, like, Steven Spielberg heads. You know what I mean? Who wouldn't have been growing up in that era? Like, he had so many great hits. But the Batman E.T. thing, I actually thought was mildly funny. I was like... That would be an interesting movie.
There were a couple jokes like that I was like, if the rest of the movie was hitting harder, I probably would have laughed at that, but I'm in such a bad mood that it didn't land.
Yeah, that's fair.
Well, that's just me. So, rating?
Rating. Well, again, I hate, like, stupid humor where it's like, they're doing the Jinx and they're like, let's do Jinx. Let's call the record plays. And then they just, like, went too far with it. And it's like, no. I hate super, like, with comedy, it should be rule of 3 at most. I prefer, like, callback jokes to some degree.
It can be, like,
if it's really good.
Rule of 3 in the moment and then a callback later, right?
Sure.
I would argue.
And rule of 3, it has to be really smart how they present it. It has to be, like, sneak up on you. It can't be, like, hitting you over the head like, I'm ready. It's like, shut up!
Yeah,
like,
you prefer the long play, like the Community long play, Beetlejuice, like over the course of a season?
100%, because it's like, look how much thought they put into that. That's so smart, instead of just like, isn't it so funny that we're talking fast and we're saying the same line over again? That's not smart writing.
Yeah. So that's your rating?
Yes. So overall, I found it fun, but I found it fun in the same way that I would find, like, Wild Wild West. And it's like,
Which I still haven't seen.
That's not a good movie.
Yeah.
Or Canadian Bacon.
So. Canadian Bacon was funny.
It's like, that was enjoyable, and, you know, I'd maybe watch it with my nephew or something, you know? And I would find enjoyment watching it with a child and seeing it through their eyes. But would I recommend it to another adult, or would I rewatch it again on my own? I don't know. Maybe a 6.
Out of 10?
Yeah, because there was a few chuckles, but you're right that the chip animation wasn't that good, and there was some kind of bad jokes, and they were trying to do a send-up, and they were trying to pay homage, and they were trying to reference things that they thought were stupid, but then they also did them, so that was sort of a point against it, but it was also interesting. But it was also maybe a little cliche. So it was
a mixed bag.
It was really a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Not a perfect movie.
No.
But it was enjoyable to rewatch for sure.
It's an imperfect classic. I would give it an easy 8. You know, it's not one of my favorite movies, but it's just a movie that I respect, and that there's a lot to love about it.
There's definitely a lot to love.
If anything, I found the plot of both Roger Rabbit and Chip and Dale like slightly confusing, slightly contrived. Like, why is it that when there's like a hard-boiled detective mystery, it's all about like land development and putting in a highway, you know, like Chinatown and all that. It's like,
yeah. Okay, to me that felt like too inside Hollywood. That's like a huge complaint in LA, is that the traffic's bad and that there's like tons of highways. Right. So it felt like they were really like playing it to the Oscar voter people kind of thing, or like the people that live in LA. Isn't it so funny that there used to be like good transit, and then like some evil stupid people put in a highway? now we have lots of traffic. Yeah, like, I don't know.
Well, moving on and looking ahead to the future, unlike most episodes where we kind of have a little back and forth debate on what we're kind of looking at to watch ahead, but we're not sure. It's an easy vote for what we're watching next, because this episode was originally going to be these two movies, but you really wanted to watch Chip and Dale, and I wanted to give you that good vibes that you were looking for. Then as soon as we finished it, I wanted to watch Roger Rabbit, so that became this episode. Next episode is most definitely going to be Light and Magic,
right,
and El Mariachi.
Right.
Light and Magic is the documentary that just came out I believe it's on Disney Plus, about Industrial Light and Magic, the effects studio that was created for and worked on Star Wars and went on to work on countless other films and do amazing work. So excited for that movie.
I'm excited to see like old footage of that. What I hate about documentaries is when they show people in modern day and they're like, yeah, it was great times, man. And it's
but
like,
not
no.
actually have any archival footage.
Yeah, it's this sort of the tell, don't show thing. So I'm really hoping, since it's a pretty iconic company, that they have a lot of footage for it. So that'll be really fun.
What I want to see, I really want to see like blown takes. You know, like I want to see a side by side, like, oh, here's the take of this thing blowing up that ended up in Star Wars, and here's the take that we did right before that one where the model got totally messed up and everyone screwed up and it was hilarious and awful, and we had to spend like 18 hours redoing that model to redo the take. Wow. That's what I want to see.
I like to see like the triumphs and the failures. Mm-hmm. Like that's all part of it. That's what makes Movies That Made Us so interesting. It's like, oh no, like production was gonna shut down because of this thing, but then we got picked up by this other guy, and then we went around and started telling them, and like just like you hear about the failures, but then it's also their success. So it's like rooting for an underdog, kind of. Yeah,
I hope it's a fun-loving documentary. I hope it's a combination of the Movies That Made Us and also Empire of Dreams, which is the like 2.5-ish hour documentary that came on one of the old Star Wars DVDs. That's a great documentary about the original Star Wars trilogy. I highly recommend it. Another one of my favorite documentaries. So I hope it's kind of those combined.
I would imagine so, because obviously, a lot of Empire of Dreams is about George Lucas not being able to do things with the resources he already had. So then he created a lot of what modern day filmmakers implement now. I
know, like so much.
So much.
Industrial Light and Magic, Skywalker Sound. Did he have a hand in creating like Dolby Digital?
Yep.
I think he did.
And non-destructive editing.
Yeah, non-linear film editing, yeah.
Which is what you use every day.
And Pixar.
And I use photo versions of non-destructive editing.
Yeah. Like George Lucas gets made fun of a lot for the prequels and all that, but he contributed so much to filmmaking.
He's a pioneer of filmmaking. Whether or not he is an amazing director,
he's not.
Well, the problem is with auteurs, if they're not great, is people are like, oh, you're so good, you get to make all the decisions. And they're not like, you know what, I don't think this is a good idea. I think we should go in a different direction with this. Like with the Lucille Ball movie, where it was written and directed by
Aaron Sorkin.
It's like, oh, I love you, Aaron Sorkin. Oh, you're so great. Oh, you did The Social Network. You get to make all the decisions and not being like, no, Lucille Ball shouldn't be played by her.
Yeah, I'm a strong proponent of writers' rooms where it's like, you know, maybe one person will write the entirety of a script, but then you should still have people to bounce these ideas off of that aren't just yes men that are like,
agreed.
Great idea, Mr. Lucas. But I will commend George Lucas for being really like steadfast in what he wanted. Because I've been, you know, on YouTube, once you recommended one thing and you watch it and you like it, then you recommended like 10 more things. I've been watching a lot of short clips of George Lucas interviews lately where it's very clear that like he made movies for himself. He made the movies that he wanted to make. He didn't make movies to please critics, you
Certainly.
know. And critics will be like, well, I don't think it should have been done that way. And George Lucas is like, whether or not the way that you think it should be done was the right way or the wrong way, it wasn't the way that I wanted to do it. And I did it the way that I wanted to do it. And that's the way it is.
Well, I respect that a lot, is that he had a vision, and obviously that vision paid off in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And it's like, say what we will about the 2000s trilogy. Mm-hmm. People at the time poo-pooed on it, but people still watch it today.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some merit there.
For sure.
And, I mean, he cast Ewan McGregor, which was a brilliant decision.
Chef's kiss. So very excited for Light and Magic. I don't know. Is it actually a movie or is it a series?
I think it's like a mini series.
I kind of hope it's a series.
Like a 4-parter or something like that.
That I'm pumped about. We'll cover it on the podcast anyway. even if it's not a movie, just because I'm so excited about it. And I'm sure I'll have lots to say.
It's about filmmaking. So
yeah,
I
exactly.
think it really fits. And then
that's the tone of the next episode is going to be filmmaking.
El Mariachi, I just read the book Rebel Without a Crew after years of reading part of it and then putting it down and then reading part of it, putting it down.
I finally convinced you to finish it.
I finally finished it. It is great. And, you know, there's a lot to love about that. And I'm excited to see what the actual movie is about because the book is about him making El Mariachi his first film, his first feature in the middle of college at like the age of like 20 something as a newlywed.
Yeah.
So
we'll be able to relate to it as like, you know, independent sort of filmmakers / video media producers.
Media creatives.
People who went to college for film, put it that way.
I would say you're definitely a filmmaker. I am a camera person.
Yes.
I don't make motion
Another
picture.
documentary that we should watch.
Yes. That by Dick Johnson, the director of that.
Yeah.
Dick Johnson is dead.
Yeah.
So, and I mean, I have so many films that I'm like, oh man, I really want to see this. Like I want to see Harvey that was referenced in Who Framed Roger Rabbit with the guy from Vertigo.
You caught that reference and I didn't understand.
Okay. So, what's the guy's name from Vertigo? I don't know why his name escapes me.
The actor or the character?
The actor.
Jimmy Stewart.
Jimmy Stewart plays a guy that has like that sees like an invisible rabbit. So it's like a film about like mental health issues.
Okay. Oh, okay. Now I get the reference.
Yeah. So he's like,
Brava, very
they're
funny.
like, oh, I
How
see
very
a rabbit.
droll.
Yeah. So it would have made more sense back then.
So next time you see us, we'll be talking about Light and Magic and El Mariachi. Very excited for both. I haven't seen El Mariachi. I read the book. It was my copy of the book, actually, that I lent to you for years and years. Before we got married, I lent it to you. Then we got married.
Before we were dating, almost.
Yeah. And yes, definitely before we were dating. And then when we got married, we pooled our book collections, and I was reunited with it once again. And so I've seen it. I've seen El Mariachi and Desperado. So maybe we'll watch Desperado sometime in the future, but
at some point. There's a lot of things on my list that I'm amped for.
Yeah.
So
very, very excited for the next episode, and see you then.
See you then.
Have fun. It was a long episode.
I bet.